Hello, Amanda. So good to see you.
Hey Mary, how are you today?
Good. I'm so excited to chat about your article on butterfly living and how you wrote about your word of the year. You quoted your word of the year was an encouragement and affirmation that God was with you. Can you
Hmm.
elaborate on your practice for choosing a word of the year?
Yeah, I think spending any time purposefully listening for God is always good. But when you're really asking Him to do something specific and you're willing to listen until you think you've heard Him, and then let him affirm himself, that's a whole new ball game. And so I love doing a word of the year because I know that God has a plan and I know that it's good, but sometimes I'm not even asking him what it is. And so by doing this practice, I think what we do is we allow God to actually be God and learn how to be a little bit more intentional about listening for his voice.
That's great. That's great. I love that. So you use a process, how God reveals your word of the year. Maybe you can
Mhm.
share a little bit how you go about choosing it.
Well, again, I don't know that I'm choosing it. What I think I'm doing again is listening. And
That's
so how often do and I think there are people that choose them and that's okay too, but what I do is I listen. And what you have to learn how to do is be comfortable when you don't get an immediate answer.
oh,
So what I'll do is yeah, I'll start by maybe being in the word, listening to some worship music, and then sitting down with my journal and a blank page and a pen and just say, hey, God, what is it that you want to talk to me about for this next year? What is it that I need to focus on? And be willing to have it be silent for a little while. Maybe he doesn't answer just then, but continue asking. Sometimes he answers right away. Sometimes he takes a little bit, but he always answers. And then he affirms. Once I think I've heard him, he'll affirm that, yes, indeed, that's what I want you to look at this year.
wow. Sounds so simple, but that silence and that blank page,
Hard.
that is really hard. It takes a lot of spiritual discipline, though, but I agree with you. Sometimes we do have to wait. So,
Yeah.
you wrote your word is vacancy, which is such a unique word of the year. We hear flourish, we hear joy, peace, great words. Like I love vocabulary, I love words. When I read your article, I was like, vacancy. And then you talk about perspective. So can you
Mm.
share a little bit about that word vacancy and how it shifted your perspective?
Absolutely. And I think it's proof that it was God's voice because I wanted to hear flourish and joy and all of those good things. And I was kind of expectant for that. But when I really sat there with that plan of listening till I heard him, it was clear that that was the word. And at first, I was not happy about it. I have to be honest. I felt a little bit scared by that word. It seemed like a very difficult word for me to lock onto. But what I learned as I spent time with God and as He showed me is the great thing about a word for the year is He will use it through all these different seasons of the year and he will unpack it. It's like God almost speaks in poetry, right? He'll
Yes.
condense something down to this very solid truth. And then as you spend time in it, it just blooms and unpacks itself. And so with vacancy, the one thing I really learned in his perspective shift was that instead of looking at the word as something that I thought was negative, what he wanted to do was show me I have to clear out some clutter, some things that you gathered along the way that I never told you to pick up, so I can make room for what I want to give you. And
Wow.
that perspective shift made it a whole different word for me. And I look at that word now dearly, whereas before it was scary. And now it's like, wow, what a blessing that he cared enough to say, hey, whoa, your arms are full. Time to
Yes.
put a few things down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love the visual too, the blinking sign, that
Yeah.
we associate with vacancy. That's great. And you're right. It's a very different kind of word that you don't usually hear, which makes you really believe it came from God. So that's a
Yeah.
great article. And if anyone hasn't read it on Butterfly Living, I highly encourage it because I think it'll provide hope and some clarity on this topic of choosing a word for the year. As you say, letting God reveal a word of the year. Um,
Yeah.
now, if you were helping someone,
Hmm.
how would you suggest they go about choosing or letting God reveal a word for the upcoming year? Or even if you're in the middle of a year listening, it doesn't really matter. What
Yeah.
tips would you give?
Again, I would say practice listening, put on your listening ears, as teachers would say, because I think we spend so much time in our lives speaking. And
Yeah.
so get comfortable with silence. Next thing I would say is get comfortable with the fact that once you ask the question, don't try to manipulate the answer, right? If you've got your pen and your empty page, start just writing whatever it is that you're hearing and stop trying to make it pretty or make sense. Just
Mm,
write it down. Kind of like a stream of consciousness, if you've
yes.
ever done that, and write those things down. And if you don't feel that that really is comprehensive and makes sense to you yet, just keep going until you feel like you've definitely heard. And as I said, God will affirm himself after that. He'll continue on in different ways so that you really feel sure that this is it. But I think it's this great, wonderful calling that he invites us in to be a little bit more obedient, a little bit more curious, and a lot more still.
Mm.
Be still and know that I am God actually means cease striving. And so it's this great time, if you want to let it be, no matter what time of the year, to just sit quietly in the peaceful presence of God and see what he has planned for you. Because I'm going to tell you, it is never what you think, and it's always better than you could imagine.
Oh, yes, I love that. It's true. And I actually had a
Yeah.
conversation with Julie about Be Still with God that people can listen to as well. She has a beautiful practice about how to be still and connect with Jesus. Do you look up your word? That's something I've done. Like one year I had pivot and I wanted
Mhm.
to break the meaning down. Did you do that with vacancy? Like to really understand, or did you know what it was?
I knew because I spent a lot of time with God. So with that particular word, sometimes I do because I'm a digger. I love to do that. Sometimes I'll be even looking in the Greek and Hebrew and all that stuff.
Yes.
But with that particular word, it took me so off guard that I spent a lot more time listening and journaling because I wasn't expecting that. And so as I spent time with God, that's when he started to reveal to me, hey, you've got this clutter, you've got these things that are taking up space that they really don't have the value. They're more comfort than they are purpose. And
Right.
I have things that are for your purpose, things you haven't even thought of yet, but I want to give them to you. And so as he did that, and then he did it in the midst of a pandemic, when I was cleaning out the clutter for my parents' home where I was going to move in and care for them to help them out. I was clearing out the clutter of my home as I prepared to move. Everything was shut down and vacant when I would drive back and forth. And so he just brought it home in a way that was so amplified. All I did was keep listening.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks so much. I think that will help a lot of people as they sit down to process what word they will use. And it's very helpful if you've never done it, because as you said, throughout the year, God reveals how that word, like, wow,
Mhm.
you are right here. This is a vacancy, or in my example, I did need to pivot. I did need to
Yeah.
do that. So it's beautiful. Well, thanks for sharing again. And you are very busy. You have a lot of projects. So God is filling that vacancy. Can you maybe share a little bit of where we can find you and connect with you, Amanda?
Sure. Well, I try to be on social media. I have a website, a cupofgratitude.org, but I'm on Facebook. I'm on even TikTok, believe it or not. I never thought I would be there, but there are a lot of people want to hear, about God and hear your heart and what he's sharing with you there, and also on Instagram. And I honestly think that, if somebody wants to find me, God is going to connect me with them. And of course, my big platform really is my podcast, A Cup of Gratitude, which you can check in with me any day that you want. There's almost 200 episodes for almost 4 years. And so you're on that podcast, as are a lot of the people from our book, Life Changing Stories, that you compiled, and I got a chance to be in. So really, those are conversations where if you're ever really maybe just needing to get refocused, maybe to pivot, pick one of those and listen. And honestly, it's always a conversation where God is in the forefront. You know, he's the subject of what we're talking about, but you see him working in situations from people's childhood all the way up to what they're doing now.
Yeah, I love your podcast. It's like a diary or a testimony. Your stories are just beautiful. And yes, you can read about Amanda's story in Life Changing Stories, which we collaborated on together, and profits are going to Compassion International. So it's just been great to chat. And I just
Yeah.
pray God continue to bless your work.
Thank you so much. You too.